Hi, good evening, and welcome. I'm Yaron Ayalon, Professor of Religious Studies here at Fairfield University, the Carl and Dorothy Bennett Chair of Judaic Studies, and the new Director of the Bennett Center for Judaic Studies. So new as in, like, this is my first event. So welcome to me, and, and welcome to all of you. And of course, welcome to the annual Schnurmacher Lecture, generously funded by the Platin family. I'm very excited to open this year of wonderful programming with tonight's speaker, but before I get to him, I'll just remind you that we have a few other great events coming up. For example, we'll have Professor Ken Stein of Emory University. He'll be here on October 16th to talk about Israel, 2 years after October 7th, 2 years since the beginning of the war in Gaza. Then on November 20th, we will host the annual Jacoby Lunin Lecture, and our guest will be former member of the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli Parliament, Stav Shafir, who is also a major social justice activist in Israel. And there's more this semester and next. I'm not going to give you the full list now. I do encourage you to join our email list and follow us on Facebook, and there are going to be more opportunities to know what we're doing soon, so you'll hear about them. Okay, so I guess now for tonight's guest. So Professor Alan Verskin is professor and the Samuel J. Zaks Chair of Jewish History at the University of Toronto. His area of research include religious, legal, and social history in both Jewish and Islamic contexts from the Middle Ages through the 19th century. Professor Verskin is the author of 4 books. One is Oppressed in the Land, Fatwas on Muslims Living Under Non-Muslim Rule from the Middle Ages to the Present, from 2013. And then Islamic Law and the Crisis of the Reconquista from 2015. And they examine Muslim responses to conquest, colonialism, and different choices that Muslims made about whether and how to adapt to living among non-Muslim authorities. His 3rd book, A Vision of Yemen, The Travels of a European Orientalist and His Native Guide, explored Jewish-Muslim relations in 19th century Yemen. And his most recent book, Diary of a Black Jewish Messiah, which it's my favorite of your 4, I just want to say that, explores Jewish messianic responses to Iberian forced conversion and expulsion by telling the story of the messianic figure David HaReuveni, who was burned at the stake in 1538. In addition to these books, Professor Verskin is the author of numerous articles on the Jewish experience in the Middle East and in Europe and of all sorts of other things. Anyways, Professor Verskin earned his BA from the University of Toronto, his MA from the University of Chicago, and his PhD from Princeton University, where he reluctantly had to tolerate me for 5 years. So please join me in welcoming Professor Alan Verskin.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the donors who made this possible. And thank you to Yaron, not just for inviting me, but for setting this talk in motion. In many ways, it's kind of a response to conversations that we've had over the course of 20 years. So I met Yaron under fairly traumatic circumstances. It was a prospective students' day at Princeton University. And they've since discontinued this day because of its consequences, but they invited all of the prospective candidates to give papers and then attack one another, asking hostile questions. February 2004. And Yaron didn't attack anyone. He was very generous, and he came to me afterwards. I gave a paper on medieval French Jewish intellectual history, and he said, it's very, very interesting, but what about the actual guy? You've taught me all about his ideas, about his thought, but what about the community that he lived in? What did the town look like? And so on and so forth. And that was the first of many discussions I had with Yaron where he pushed me on social history. I was interested in the intellectual world at the time, and Yaron always asked me, what were the social conditions that made that intellectual world possible? And over the years, I've been won over, and more of my work has dealt with those kinds of questions. And that's what this talk is really all about. We know that medieval Jews and Christians and Muslims quoted one another in their books, whether those books were of philosophy, of theology, of medicine. We know they read each other's books. But could we ever find those people in the same room? That was my kind of question. Often the answer is not, but occasionally the answer is yes. And I'm interested in those particular circumstances. And I'm arranging this lecture around three particular areas in which those encounters occurred. I'm first going to deal with theology, then I'm going to deal with philosophy, and then I'm going to deal with medicine. So the first is about theology. And the big thing that facilitated those encounters was the Abbasid Revolution, which happened in 750. A new dynasty came to rule over the Islamic world. The dynasty before this was in 750. Before that, the Umayyad dynasty had not regarded conversion of non-Muslims as a priority. The conversions of ethnic Arabs was a priority, but for others, they were happy for them to stay in their religion, even though some conversion did occur. But the Abbasids felt that conversion should be part of that agenda, but they didn't want it to be a violent conversion by the sword. They wanted it to be a conversion based on intellectual persuasion. So to do that, they wanted to figure out how you could get the very best possible debates going between Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians. And they'd heard about Aristotle's Topics, that deals with the kinds of laws of rhetoric and logic and rules for those kinds of debates. And they went to Timothy I, an Nestorian patriarch, to translate it into Arabic. And that was the very first translation of Greek into Arabic that was ever made. And it was made for the purpose of fostering this kind of interreligious dialogue. Now, why did the Abbasids do this? For reasons different from the way for reasons why religious dialogue is established today. They did it because they thought that if everything was rationally presented, Islam was a rational religion, and people would naturally convert to Islam. So that was the purpose of having these intellectual debates, that people would reason through debate and logic and would come to agree. But it worked out about as well as anyone who knows anything about academics today worked out. Everyone divided into millions of different opinions. There are tons of Muslim sects and Jewish sects and Christian sects. You throw reason into the picture and debate into the picture, you very often do not get unity. And that was the ultimate conclusion. But while it was going, there were, in fact, lots of meetings between Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And we have a wonderful account, and really what I'm going to be doing today is sharing texts with you of that environment, of those literary salons in which those debates occurred. And this account is by someone who went to one of those debates and absolutely hated it. And this is the first text. Abdullah ibn Abi Zayd questioned Ahmad ibn Sa'di when he arrived in Kairouan from the lands of the East. He said to him, "Did you attend the gatherings of the theologians?" So this is somebody from the Islamic West. He makes his way all the way to Baghdad. He sees the sites of Baghdad, and one of those sites are these debates that are happening. And then he goes back, and he's asked by locals what he thought about them. He replied, "Yes, indeed. I attended them twice. Then I stopped going to their gatherings and never went back to them." Ibn Abi Zayd asked him, "Why was that?" He replied, At the first gathering I attended, I found myself in an assembly that included people of every persuasion. Muslims, both Sunnis and heretics, and unbelievers, including Zoroastrians, materialists, Manichaeans, Jews, Christians, and other kinds of unbelievers. So kind of a laundry list of unbelievers there. Each group had a leader who engaged in disputation according to his doctrine and defended it in argument. When the leader of any group arrived, all present stood for him until he sat down, seating themselves when he did. When the assembly was full, and they saw that there was no one they were waiting for, one of the unbelievers spoke as follows: "You have come together to engage in disputation. So the Muslims should not adduce their scripture or the words of their prophet as proof against us, since we don't believe in any of this or affirm it. We engage in disputation only with rational proofs and on the basis of reason and analogy." So the idea of this is you get people from all different religions into the same room. They're supposed to talk about the ultimate truths of God and the world and so on and so forth, but they're only allowed to talk on the basis of points that everyone accepts. So you can't refer to your own scripture, because there's going to be someone in that room who doesn't accept it. So the unbeliever said that, and the Muslims say, "Yes, we grant you that. We're happy to proceed according to those rules." Abu Umar concluded, "When I heard that, I did not want to go back to that gathering. I was then told that there was another gathering for theology, so I attended it and found that they behaved just like the other lot. So I stopped going to the gatherings of the theologians, and I never went back to them." So this is a very disgruntled person. He's obviously a very conservative Muslim who accepts the Quran, accepts traditional Islamic texts, and wants to share them and talk about them. And here's this gathering that doesn't allow him to do that. So he says, I'm not going there, and he leaves. But what we actually have is a wonderful record of what happened for all of those people who did participate, right? So there again, you have an example of theologians interacting with one another across religious boundaries. Now, I think this environment where everyone was getting together and talking about their religion and talking about religious truths was actually profoundly threatening, right? To see all of those alternatives. Sometimes when you see all of those alternatives, you lose certainty about the religious choices that you yourself have made. That having all of those people of different religions together in a room can sometimes lead to a profound skepticism. And the next text I have is about that. It's about a person who saw all of those different religions articulating their ideas and left with less certainty about his own. So here we have the text. It's by At-Tawhidi. The man said, this is the second one on your sheet, "I saw that there are three ways to establish the truth of a religion. The first is prophecy and miracles, but I've never personally witnessed such things, and so cannot believe in the creeds that are based on them." So he's saying there are religions, and many of those religions, their truth rests on the fact that you believe that there were genuine prophetic relations behind them, that there were genuine miracles behind them. But he's sitting there centuries after those events happened, and he's saying, I just can't rely on that. The second is by persuasion and debate. And he says, "But when I participate in disputes, like the one we saw referenced before, I am the victor one day, but the next I'm defeated. I sometimes find the arguments of others more compelling, and so make them my own. But this means that what I formerly held to be false becomes true in my mind, and what I held to be true becomes false. I therefore saw that this method of argumentation is not useful in judging something true or false." Because a lot of what happens in that room where people are debating religious truths is the art of rhetoric. And there may be better or worse debaters, and that doesn't always mean that the ideas are better or worse. So he says, I can't rely on that kind of logic. I can't rely on the texts, the religious texts, and I can't rely on logical debates either. The third alleged way to confirm a religion is through historical reports in books. I did not find one community better than another in that respect. They are all the same in their claims, arguments, and apologetics. So At-Tawhidi then speaks to this man, And he asks him, he says, given all of your skepticism, why are you continuing to follow your religion? Why are you still a religious person despite what you've just said? And the man responds, I think, in a way which is very different from what you would see, say, in contemporary, atheistic texts. Listen to the justification that he gives for why he's still within his religious community. He responds, because it, my religion, has a sanctity that other religions do not. What is that sanctity? I was born in it and grew up in it. I imbibed its sweetness and grew fond of the customs of its followers. I was like a man who enters a caravanserai to seek shade for part of a day when the sky is bright. The owner of the caravanserai puts him in one of the chambers without him having any knowledge of it in advance. In the meantime, a cloud appears and it begins to pour. When his chamber starts to leak, he looks out at the other chambers in the inn. All of them leak, no less than his, and the inn's courtyard has turned to mud. He therefore decides to remain in his place and not to move to another chamber in the hope of finding tranquility, since he would only muddy his legs in the muck in the courtyard. He thus chooses to abide patiently in the chamber assigned to him. He is like me. I was born without comprehension. Then my parents introduced me into this religion without my knowledge. When I examined it, I found it to be like other religions, and I saw that it was dearer to me to patiently abide in it than to leave it. I would only put it aside and turn to another for a compelling reason that led me to prefer it over my own, but I have not found a convincing argument for one religion without finding the same for other religions. So it's a remarkable passage. So a caravanserai is a bunch of tents, normally in a kind of a circle. And in this particular case, it's raining heavily. And his tent is leaking. And so it might make sense to go to look for another tent that is not leaking, the tent being a sort of a metaphor for his religion. But if you go out, the courtyard's pouring with rain and it's muddy and you're going to get more damage than if you just stay in your leaky tent. So he stays. But why does he like his tent so much? Because what is religion for him? It's not about the ultimate truths that a religion conveys. It's about the fact that he was raised in it with by his parents, that it has meanings to him, because it has familial meanings to him, and it has broader communal meanings to him. That he is staying there because he has built a meaningful community. And the fact that the theology may not quite be there and is a little shaky isn't of concern to him. So it's a very, I find it at least, a very loving critique of religion. This is a skeptic, but someone who doesn't want to say goodbye to all of the people who he's grown up together with in this particular religion, which, by the way, is not named in this account. Okay. So these texts are very much the product of that era of religious debate where the Abbasids cultivated debate in the hope that people would rationally see that Islam was the correct religion. It didn't work out, and people moved away from those kinds of debates. But Muslims, Christians, and Jews still met one another in another realm, and that was the realm of philosophy. And the next text that we have is by a Christian philosopher, a Syrian Jacobite philosopher named Yahya ibn Adi. And he has this wonderful statement about the potential for philosophy to bring people of different religions together. And that's under the section philosophy on page 2 of your handout. He says, "It is worthwhile for one who loves perfection to train his soul to harbor friendship toward all men and to have affection and compassion for them. For men are one tribe related to one another, joined together by humanity. Add the adornment of the divine power as in all and in each and every one of them, it being the rational soul. It is by means of the soul that man becomes human, and it is the noblest of the two parts of man, which are the soul and the body. Man in reality is the rational soul, and it is one substance in all men. All men are really a single entity in many individuals. Yahya ibn Adi is coming from the Christian tradition, and he writes traditional Jacobite theology, but he sees humanity right across the religious divide because of this rational potential that exists in all human beings, regardless of their religions. So I think that is the big promise that philosophy has to bring people together. And I think that there's some evidence that happened in person, that philosophy did bring people together from different religions in person. And I'm going to deal with one example of that. And that's about a friendship between a kind of a polymath and a politician. Ibn al-Kifti and Rabbi Joseph ibn Shimon. And for those of you who are philosophy fans, Rabbi Joseph ibn Shimon is the rabbi to whom Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed was dedicated. So a very major figure within the Jewish tradition. And Ibn al-Kifti was a very high-ranking Muslim government official. He was a judge, he became chief judge of the military, then he became minister of the treasury, and eventually he rose to the position of vizier, which is the highest position under the sultan. And he wrote a lot of books, but he also wrote biographical dictionaries, which included biographies of accomplished people that some of whom he had met at court during his own time. And most of the people that he writes about are Muslim. He's a Muslim, so he writes about Muslims. But he also writes about his friend Rabbi Joseph, who is Jewish. I'll read his description of Rabbi Joseph and of the warm friendship that developed between them. Abul Hajjaj Yusuf ibn Yahya ibn Ishaq as-Sabti al-Maghribi was a resident of Aleppo who was known in Suta as Ibn Shamun, which is Shimon. Shamun was his 8th or 9th great-grandfather and a physician of Fezi origin. While his father was occupied there in Suta with work in the market, Yusuf studiously read philosophy in these lands and attained a good grasp of it, and also applied himself to mathematics and excelled in it. These sciences were always present in his mind during discussions. So what I often say to my students is, how do you become a Jewish philosopher? You have a rich father. The father worked hard in the market, so his son could take time off to study mathematics and philosophy, and that's how the story begins. When the Jews and Christians of this land were forced to choose between conversion to Islam or exile, he hid his religion, but when he was able to devise a plan to leave for the land of Egypt, he did so and emigrated with his property. Generally speaking, these episodes of forced conversion of Jews to Islam are few and far between, but this is a period in which they do occur among the Almohad dynasty in precisely this region in what's now Morocco. And Yusuf hides his religion, which means he pretended to be a Muslim for some time. And then when he could, he left for Egypt, where that kind of persecution didn't take place. Well, the one thing which I think is obvious to the contemporary audience, but maybe not obvious to now, is a Jew converting to Islam and then converting back to Judaism is very, very controversial, very against the law. There are very severe punishments for that happening. But this Muslim author, who's from a long line of Muslim scholars, just mentions it. He says he pretended to be a Muslim for some time, then he returned to Judaism, and he's still my friend, right? That's striking to me reading it. When he arrived in Egypt, he met Musa ibn Maimun al-Qurtubi, who is Maimonides. the head of the Jews in Egypt. He studied under him and resided with him for some time. He asked him, this is meaning Rabbi Joseph asked him, Maimonides, to correct an edition of the astronomy of Jabir ibn Aflach al-Andalusi, which he had brought with him from Suta, and so he and Musa assembled it, correcting and redacting it. I think this is remarkable. Today, this wouldn't happen. If you're going to travel across the world to meet the world's greatest rabbi, you might want to study Torah with him, just a guess. But here, they're studying astronomy together, right? That's what you go to a rabbi to learn about. Then Rabbi Joseph left Cairo for Damascus, alighted in Aleppo, resided there for a time, and became allied through marriage with an Aleppan Jew known as Abu Lalala, the secretary of the revenue office. He then left Aleppo to trade in Iraq and went so far as India. He returned home safe, became wealthy, and gave up traveling. He began to trade and bought a property close by Aleppo. People went to him for instruction, and he taught many of its residents and travelers. He worked with the elite physicians in the court of Azahiriya in Aleppo and was full of genius and of a penetrating mind. Now, when you normally read biographical dictionaries, that's where it ends. There's a nice biographical sketch, and then that's it. But here, we get a very personal and unusual reflection by this Muslim vizier about his Jewish friend. He says, there was a long-lasting friendship between us. One day, he complained to me, saying, I have 2 daughters, and I fear for them, lest the Sultan take a share of the inheritance. I wish that I could have a male child. So this was a particular feature of this local version of Islamic law, that if you only had female children, the portion of the inheritance that would have gone to the male children you might have had went to the government. So there's clearly misogyny involved in this, but what's really, what's I think the dominant theme is that they're worried that the government is going to take a good portion of the inheritance from this family and impoverish them. So that's the reason why he wants a male child, not for sort of the traditional reasons, that he wants to preserve what he's earned over the generations. So I told him of a trick to use during coitus in order to obtain a male child that was reported by one of the physicians. He said, I want to do that. He then married another wife on account of the death of the first, and after some time she conceived. He said, I have done what you said, and she, as God has wished, gave birth to a male child. He came to me jubilant with happiness, but then, after some time, I heard that the mother of the child had taken him to the bathhouse, and she had poured too much hot water over him, and he had died. As a result of this, he became deeply troubled, and when I came to console him, I said to him, be patient and do it again. So he did, and she conceived and gave him a male child. He called him Abdul Baki, means the one who kind of survived, the survivor, the one who remained, and he lived. Then he ignored what I had told him, and she conceived and gave him a daughter. He blamed himself for ignoring what I had told him, and after some time employed it again, and she bore him another male. So he said, I cannot deny the truth of what my experience tells me. It has become settled to me such that I cannot deny it. Now we learn so much about this friendship between these two men. Ibn al-Kifti at that point is head of the treasury. So on the one hand, he's going to the head of the treasury saying, you guys are going to take a good chunk of the family wealth when I die. Give me some financial advice, right? That's the thing. On the other hand, they're also exchanging sex tips. That's what this is about. It's very, very intimate. And then the Muslim vizier is comforting Rabbi Joseph on the death of his first son. You can't imagine a closer friendship. They're talking about absolutely everything together. They're sharing everything. These, when you learn about these philosophers in books, there's this philosopher, he's written this book, there's that philosopher, they quote each other. But here, there's much more to the relationship than just that intellectual encounter. So They've established this close relationship. They're talking about death together, and death in this period was omnipresent. We regard today the greatest tragedy is that of a parent losing a child. And I would venture to say in this period that most parents had lost a child. Most children did not survive infancy. Now, why are people in this period constantly writing about the afterlife? Why is that such a big focus of theology? Because they needed practical answers to those questions. They felt those deaths just as we feel them today. And theology was an outgrowth of it. It wasn't just a theoretical set of questions. So the talk about real death in the family is going to lead into a broader theological discussion. One day I said to him, if the soul is immortal, after death, it will know the state of all that exists outside of it. So make a pact with me, that if you die before me, you will appear to me, and if I die before you, I will appear to you. He agreed, and I urged him not to neglect his promise. So you can imagine the stakes of this debate. A Muslim and a Jew, two philosophers. The one who dies first is going to come back and we'll figure out who was right. But they trust one another, right? And they have every reason to do it. We've seen all of the reasons. We've seen that trust building up. He died, and after 2 years had passed, I saw him in my sleep. He was sitting in the mosque's courtyard outside the mosque by the funerary compound. He was wearing new white garments of Nasafi fabric. So just there, Nasafi fabric, it's, those pictures of like flowing white robes of angels in heaven. That's what Nasafi fabric is from what's now Uzbekistan. It's good quality white fabric like you'd want to see people wearing in heaven. I said to him, "Oh, doctor, did we not agree that you would come to inform me of what you had encountered?" But he laughed and turned his face away. So I grabbed him by the hand and said, "You must tell me what you encountered and what it is like after death." He said to me, "The universal is connected to the universe, and the partial is connected to the part." I understood that he was speaking about his condition. That is, he was indicating that the universal soul returned to the universal world, and the body, which remains partial, remains with the part which is the earth center. After waking, I was amazed at the brilliance of what he had said. We ask God to forgive us. When we return to the Creator, may his glory be honored and exalted. So it's a discussion about death, but it's not just death as a philosophical frontier. This is a very practical conversation. It's a practical response to a very mundane, very concrete tragedy that has happened in Joseph's family, the death of his baby son. It's a discussion about death which proceeds from a financial challenge, the financial challenge that this death will present as a result of the fact that Joseph has only daughters. That does not diminish the debate. I think it intensifies it. The fact that it's connected to that kind of reality. What does the dream mean? I think it means that there are no shortcuts. Joseph only shows up 2 years later, and he gives this very enigmatic response, and he's reluctant to even give that. But there's a lot of honesty in this dream from Ibn al-Kifti. He's the one recounting the dream. He can say the dream said whatever he wanted it to say. He could say, well, Joseph said, well, Judaism didn't really work out for me, and it's good you're sticking with Islam. It's a dream where Islam is still front and center. There's a mosque there. But Joseph is a little distance from the mosque, and he's happy. It shows that his philosophical life, his Jewish life, has worked out well for him. And I think it's a tribute to Ibn al-Kifti that he tells the story in that way, rather than telling it with a kind of a cheap kind of posthumous victory. What does the phrase mean? I think the phrase justifies the philosophical lives that both Rabbi Joseph and Ibn al-Kifti have led. I think they're also saying that the particularist aspects of people's lives, their lives within their religious communities, their lives as Jews, their lives as Muslims, have value and don't disappear in the end. Philosophical universals exist. The universals of Islam exist as well. But there's room in heaven for all of those kinds of things. So something to think about those encounters, really practical encounters. Yes, you can read their works and see them quoting one another, but this is something different. This is actual people in a room talking about things that matter. I now want to move on to a more complicated and in some ways more tragic, but moving way in which you see this quest for knowledge. Move people to interact across religious boundaries. So we're going to move to Christians, and not just Christians, to Catholics. This part is about medicine. And it's known that medicine held an attraction for intellectually minded Jews in both the Islamic and the Christian world. Jews heavily participated in medicine in the Islamic world, also to some extent in the Christian world. But in the 12th century, regulations emerged which sought to bar Jews from entering that Christian world of medicine that was beginning to be developed in universities. Jews could not legally enter many of these universities in which medicine was being taught. And in some cases, Jews were actually forbidden from buying scientific books in Latin. And in many ways, I think one of the biggest hurdles for Jews in learning medicine this period was learning Latin. When they'd been in the Islamic world, Jews spoke Arabic, so it was not a stretch for them to read an Arabic medical book. But reading a medical book in Latin was a very big step for Jews who had not been educated in that. But Christian medical knowledge was very attractive to Jews. This was a period in which medicine was developing very fast, and they desperately sought that knowledge for their own sake and also for the sake of their patients, and they tried to develop that knowledge in any way that they could. So what we're going to see here are two examples. You can flip the page here. The first is about a Jew who converts to Christianity in Provence, and in the 1190s writes about his ardent desire for medical knowledge and the lack of such knowledge within the Jewish community. And he explains that he converted to Christianity in order to get medical knowledge, but he felt terribly guilty about it. So he decided to translate a huge number of medical books written in Latin into Hebrew so that other Jews wouldn't have to convert to Christianity in order to become doctors. And he calls himself Doeg HaEdomi. And this is a great pun. Doeg HaEdomi is a character from 1 Samuel who's an Edomite. And if you read 1 Samuel, this is not a good guy. This is a guy who is willing to carry out King Saul's orders to kill the Jewish priests who have been helping the later King David. So he's a villain. He's a murderer. He's one of the biblical villains. But it's a great pun because in the Middle Ages, Edomi, an Edomite, was the term used to refer to Christians. And Doeg is the anguished one. So he is the anguished Christian, right? He's converted to Christianity because he loves the Latin medical texts. And he admires so much of what Christianity produces, but there's a huge amount of self-recrimination in that choice. So that's the pun around the name. And I'll read the text. This is how he introduces one of his translations. After he glimpsed and was harmed, this is describing his conversion to Christianity, fell from the roof and was impaled, was sunk in torment, his life ended in a pit. While still wallowing in his own schemes and at the height of his deceptions, the writer said to himself, I observed the holy seed, that's the Jews, early in the morning crowding at the doors of the Gentile sages to consult about their illnesses and the illnesses of their sons and daughters. They take from them any stuff without any understanding, without knowing what it is. They do not distinguish between the impure and the pure in most of their concoctions. They mix sorts of resin with wine and introduce impure meat, suet, and blood. Not one of them escapes the category of prohibited or abominable. I therefore undertook to translate into the holy tongue, that's Hebrew, all the books of medical theory that are in there, the Christian's possession, and that I could get, as well as the best books of medical practice. These are the names of the books whose translations I completed. So that's what he says in his series of translations. He was not alone. I think that among converts to Christianity in this early medieval European period, physicians were most heavily represented for exactly this reason. And even when they didn't convert to Christianity, these doctors were in very profound and very close contact with other Christians, and it produced a very interesting intellectual mingling. And this leads me to the last text that I'm going to be introducing here. It's a medical recipe by Judah ben Solomon Natan, who was from a very prominent family of Jewish physicians. He never converted to Christianity. Not only that, there's several generations after him, all of whom are Jewish physicians. But he gives this recipe, and I guess I'm curious to know what you think about it. Another procedure learned by experience. By the way, I should add, I added the Hebrew here, just because I thought some of you wouldn't believe me if I just showed the English. This is the original medieval Hebrew below it. Another procedure learned by experience, but lacking a rationale. From the candle that was put into the font on the Saturday before Easter, take some wax which was ritually immersed in the water, and make from it a cross. Put it on the end of the piece of iron that is embedded in the flesh, putting the cross at its extremity. Then take in your hands the pincers or some other tool, and recite the prayer, Our Father in heaven, etc., until save us from all evil. Amen. When you do this slowly, it will come out. So here's a treatise about a recipe for removing like a thorn or an object that gets into someone's skin. And but what's here? Yeah, the Lord's Prayer, right? And making this cross out of wax, which is from a holy Christian source. Now, what I find interesting about this as a historian is we know that medieval Christian doctors incorporated prayers as part of their treatment. But if you leaf through Christian medical treatises of high medicine, they won't mention that. They'll mention the procedure. Where would he have learned this sort of religious accompaniment to the procedure? He could only have learned it from person-to-person contact. He could have only learned it from another Christian physician. This is not an encounter within text. This is a direct encounter with a Christian mentor doctor. And doctors, in many ways, are very conservative. This is a Jewish doctor. He doesn't believe in Christian theology of the cross, but he does believe in giving his patients the best possible treatment. And if this recipe that his Christian mentor has taught him works together with the wax and the Lord's Prayer and the cross, he's not going to mess with it. He's going to give the very best treatment that he has available. Again, he does not cease becoming Jewish. He's Jewish. His children are Jewish, but he is entirely immersed in the world of Christian medical texts and Christian medical practitioners. Okay. And that means if the Lord's Prayer works, he is going to say it for his Jewish patients. So I'm going to conclude that people encountered the ideas of other religions in texts. Texts are still important to read. But they also encountered a lot of these intellectual ideas as the result of interfaith relationships. Ideas brought people into relationships, and the relationships brought people into ideas. Being intellectual in the Middle Ages was not a lonely affair. We have an image of the philosopher in the cave. That very rarely happened. Intellectuals were embedded in communities, and we have strong evidence that those communities at times mixed with one another and exchanged ideas. And I think that in many ways, Yaron was right when I first met him in 2004, and he encouraged me to think beyond texts. And I think seeing those texts as part of a drama of ideas, which was happening on the written page, but was also happening beyond, makes the debates much more exciting and meaningful to study. So thank you. And I'm happy to take questions. Great. Is that okay? Okay, great. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you to move forward in time a little bit.
Okay.
Just think about it. I've always been curious about Christian Hebraism
Okay.
in the Renaissance period. Do we have any examples of Christians or Muslims learning Hebrew for whatever purpose in the late medieval period, and what that encounter was like? Or do you know about this later? I mean, I've always wondered, they learned Hebrew. Who did they learn Hebrew from, and what was that encounter like?
So I think you're right that the intense learning of Hebrew is in Christian Hebraism, which happens in a slightly later period. We do have Islamic texts where Hebrew words are quoted. There's a Muslim scholar by the name of Al-Biruni, who some people have claimed knew Hebrew. He was one of these geniuses, so I wouldn't put it past him. It's also possible that he went to Jews and copied the Hebrew into his book. In terms of Christian learning of Hebrew, I know there are isolated cases, but I'd have to go and do some research before I report back.
I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Is where did they go to learn their Hebrew, and what conversations would have taken place during the course of those tutorials, right?
So, I mean, the way I would approach it is I would assume similar processes were happening in the medieval period to what happens in the early modern. So, a cardinal like Egidio de Viterbo has rabbis in his house tutoring him in Hebrew. And so I assume that kind of process was happening as well. In terms of most translations from Hebrew into Latin, so this period where works often of Islamic philosophy are being translated into Hebrew and then into Latin, those definitely involve Jewish translators. I know of some examples, like Michael Scott apparently knew rabbis who were involved in the translation movement, but I don't have details on quite how those encounters happened. Yeah, thanks.
I'm just wondering, I come from a historical perspective rather than a religious.
Okay.
And this time is basically the golden age of Andalus. And prior to this, you had one religion damning another. constantly. We're better than you are, and for all the reasons, and they put the other religions down. But this is just prior to the Inquisition. I mean, yeah, basically, the Inquisitions came right after this period of time. And so I'm seeing it from a historical perspective rather than a religious. But there are elements that come into play here, and people were talking during the Golden Age, and I think that's what this is showing. That they didn't necessarily agree, but they were at least talking to one another, which was a big step from the past age. Okay, your thoughts?
So I think there are multiple members in a society, and certainly the kinds of encounters that I've described are not universal. There are some people who do stick with their religious communities, and I think that there's more of this kind of close interaction in the Islamic world than in the Christian Middle Ages. Although I still think that there are examples of close intellectual interactions within Europe, just fewer of them. Are there religious thinkers who are effectively eliminationists, that they want one religion and they're sure of their own religious truth? I'm sure that there are, but just if you look at where people are living, especially in the Islamic world, Jews and Muslims are living as neighbors. There are areas where more Jews live, but they're not sort of ghettoized areas. And I think that sort of local geography forces interactions. Eventually those interactions make their way into the kinds of texts that I've spoken. So I'm not denying that in the Middle Ages there were people who were profoundly unhappy with the degree of religious mixing. Just that I think there was a variety of viewpoints. Yeah.
Thanks. Do we know whether there were things like cafes or gathering places, bars, or that sort of thing, where people would get together in the evening to discuss their thoughts, or even at the university level? But it's sort of like I'm picturing like the Impressionists in France, right? Salons, right? Were there places where people would get together then and mix the religions? So
in the Abbasid period, you get these what they call it a majlis, where it's this it's kind of a literary or theological salon where people get together and they debate. That largely disappears after the Abbasid period. In terms of cafes, that only comes in with the introduction of coffee, and it's a very interesting historical situation. Some of the religious authorities don't like it because it, in fact, is a secular space, and it's one that is in the hands of the merchants. It's not in the hands of any religious leader, and those kinds of encounters can happen, but that is much later. Where are people interacting generally? If we look at the Cairo Geniza, a lot of them are interacting in business partnerships. Muslims and Jews are interacting together. If we look at the relationship between Ibn al-Kifti and Rabbi Joseph, I think they met at court. That Rabbi Joseph was part of the Sultan's team of physicians, and Ibn al-Kifti was the vizier, was the minister of the treasury at the time. And I think that they met in the royal court of one of Saladin's sons in Aleppo. And that wouldn't have been the only interreligious relationship that happened there. So those would have been the kinds of, I think, spaces. But definitely, I think the coffee house really is something that's transformative in that respect. Yeah. I think we have a question. Do we wait for the microphone or? Okay.
Yeah. Faith. I'm okay. I know in the last cured a couple of people by the touch of something. And I'm thinking that most of the saints, I go back to Bertrand Russell, that for some reason Jesus needs all of these saints to help him out. And I don't know how many churches, percentage-wise, are named saints rather than just. But is the notion of saints providing these miraculous cures and thereby becoming saints, is there a corresponding mode like that in the Muslim or the Jewish faith?
So there are definitely shrines that people go to. The idea behind the saint is one that you get in a variety of religious traditions. That I'm not a particularly good person, so maybe God won't listen to me, but the saint is much closer to God. So if I can get the saint's ear, the saint can get God's ear. So there's a kind of an idea of very righteous people serving as intermediaries. And it's controversial among some Muslims who feel that you should interact directly with God, that you shouldn't put an intermediary between yourself and God. But that being said, there were shrines across the Middle East, and they're still there, and people do go to them for a variety of reasons, including healing. One of the interesting things about these shrines is that they are often a single saint shrine will be frequented by people from a variety of different faiths, and particularly women. And part of that is a quest for fertility, that people are searching for any solution that they can get. And much like our doctor using wax from the baptismal font is going to go to Christianity for Christianity as part of that procedure, women will go to Jewish women will go to Muslim shrines or Christian shrines, and so on and so forth. But that was different from so-called high medicine, which is really textually based, and may be used in conjunction with magical practices and things like that, but is a kind of a distinct entity.
Do you have any idea what the sex selection advice was?
Oh, you don't want to know that. But since you asked, I have a wife who has written a book on the experiences of medieval infertile women in the Middle East, so she's given me some ideas. The idea is that one testicle produces one gender of child and the other produces the other gender. So if you can tie one off, you can ensure the gender. Now, he doesn't say that explicitly in this text, but that's probably what was being referred to. Yeah, I apologize. Yes.
Well, the rabbi stole my question, but it's okay. On a serious note,
Yeah.
your lecture's about forging intellectual law
Yes.
encounters in the Middle East.
Yes.
What lessons do you learn from these encounters and forging intellectual bonds that we should be applying today?
Okay, so the cheap way out would say that I became the cheap way out would be saying that I'm a historian so that I could avoid questions like that. But I will try anyway. I think that the way you solve any problem is by dealing with little things rather than trying to hack at the very big picture. That you don't try to find a broad-based political solution. You try to hack away at building small relationships. And I think that that's what these texts really tell us, that they're about relationships with individuals. That's what we all individually have the most control over. And I think that that's where people's energy should go. So that's my personal kind of approach, yeah. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I like that, right? That we often associate interreligious friendships with people who are not particularly religious, right? That they're able to do that because they don't care too much about their religion. But Rabbi Joseph, who was Maimonides' student, and Ibn al-Kifti, who was a religious judge, cared deeply about their religions. Rabbi Joseph cared deeply about Judaism, and Ibn al-Kifti cared deeply about Islam. But that did not stop them from forming that friendship. So I think that that's hopeful. I think what's going on with medicine is that people are building bonds over the collective goal of healing people. And they're not necessarily talking about theological differences. In fact, I doubt that they're talking about theological differences, but they're still forming relationships based on that common cause. Yeah, so thank you for that. Okay, should I hand it over to Yaron to close?
You certainly can.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I don't actually have much to say in terms of closing. Thank you again for coming. This was wonderful. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And as I just noted at the beginning, we have quite a few more events and opportunities. And please stay in touch with us and learn more about what we're about to offer. So I look forward to seeing all of you and many, many more of you in our future events. Thank you, and have a nice evening.